Good afternoon, friends, and a warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. It's really a special opportunity for us. In some ways, I feel for friends to get together and reflect together on matters that are of importance for all of us and for our communities. So this afternoon, we've really designed it specifically because it's 151 years since the birth of Mahatma Gandhi, but also 2nd of October is celebrated as International Nonviolence Day. And we've been reflecting in some ways to see that what COVID did in some ways is really highlighted some of the fractures in our society. And we saw the result of that there'd been such widespread violence, whether it's been the unrests that have happened in the USA, but also back home, the escalation in domestic violence. So it felt that it was an important time to us just to step back and draw on some of the wisdom that we have of people in our midst that have done this work for so long, and drawing on their wisdom so that we can find a way of moving forward and integrating nonviolence as a principle in everyday living. I think that's the key thing that we're wanting to encourage and support. So without more on that, I would like to introduce this afternoon our moderator for the afternoon. And it's a very dear friend, Lucille Meyer. Lucille is the current CEO of the Chrysalis Academy, which is a 21-year-old nonprofit organization based in Tokai, providing a 3-month holistic and healing-centered program for vulnerable youth across the Western Cape. And I know that this work has also moved in some of the other provinces based on the success of the approach that Lucille has implemented in the academy. But Lucille's passion, I think, has always been in education. She holds a doctorate in education from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, and her approach to education has always been very holistic. So she also holds an integral yoga teacher certification, quantum energy coach, and a trauma release exercise facilitator. I think before Lucille got into these fields, she also held many leadership roles. And just to name one or two was that she was the chief director in the office of the then Deputy President Thabo Mbeki, and also as Deputy Director General in the office when it was President Mbeki's time. And also Assistant Secretary to Parliament. And I think her last sort of role before Chrysalis was that she was Chief Executive Officer of the Cape Nature Organization until 2011. So these are some of the areas in which Lucille has worked, but I think from a personal perspective, it's her passion, her love, her vision. And I think in many ways, I've seen her work with the young people at Chrysalis, and I've just seen how the energy of love and I think also this kind of hope in what she sees is a possibility in these young people, no matter where they've come from, has been a key success to the work she's done. So Lucille, welcome, and thank you for being with us this afternoon. And I leave the floor to you now to take us through this afternoon. Thanks.
So thank you, Sister Pratibha, for the introduction. I am extremely humbled to have been asked to moderate this conversation, to talk about nonviolence when the world is so ravaged by violence, I think is critical. And just to say, as we discuss nonviolence and its application, I am going to take a very broad view of violence. Violence can be physical violence, which is visible, we can see it, but violence can also be invisible. So it can be structural violence, economic injustices, political oppression, social oppression. It can also be symbolic, where one group thinks it is superior to another group. It is also psychological, where our words cause harm to others. So I'll be taking that broad view as we engage in this conversation. I want to say, although we're looking at a screen, I am going to invite us to imagine we are sitting in a wonderful circle in a Brahma Kumaris center, because there's just so much love. So let's imagine we are all in a circle and we're facing each other as we dialogue this crucial issue in these times. Now, I've got a format for the conversation. I'm going to deviate slightly because I'm going to call on each of the speakers just to welcome you and just to bring us all into the circle. So I'm going to call on each of them very shortly. And then after that, I will introduce each one of them carefully. And then we will pose a question to start the conversation. But we don't want to leave anyone out of the conversation. So later on, I'm going to invite you to please put your questions in the chat. And you can direct the questions to one speaker or to all the speakers. In fact, as we start, don't be shy to put in the chat where you are from. It's just wonderful to have everybody's voice in the center. So let's begin. So I'm just going to call on our speakers just to greet us all and to welcome everyone here. So in no particular order, I am going to call on Sister Ela Gandhi to just extend a welcome to everybody. So Ela Gandhi.
Om Shanti, and beautiful to be in the circle. Greetings to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Pastor Wandawanda. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really amazing to be able to be in your amazing company. I feel very privileged and hoping we can have really amazing conversation together. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. So I'd like to call on Sister Veronica McHugh to welcome all of us.
Thank you so very much. I am absolutely honored to be here and to be back in South Africa. And so even though I am sitting in a Brahma Kumaris center, I can easily imagine that we're in Cape Town or Port Elizabeth or Joburg, anywhere. And so to be in this gathering is just really an honor, a privilege. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Sister McHugh. I'd like to call on Bishop Geoff Davies to extend a welcome to all of us. Bishop Davies, can you hear us?
He's on. Okay.
Okay, I think we will proceed and we'll get Bishop Davies to extend his welcome when he comes on. So what we're going to do, I'm going to introduce the speakers and pose a question to them. And as I said, please feel free to use the chat as we go along. We're going to end off our session with a meditation by Sister Veronica McHugh, and then Sister Pratibha will do the vote of thanks at 5. Bishop Davies, I see you now. Could we have your welcome? Can you please unmute for us, Bishop?
There we are, got it at last. Then said it sent a message saying I must start my video, so I don't know why. Anyway, thank you very much for the invitation. It's a privilege to be with you and for this very important gathering. Thank you. And this lovely afternoon.
Fantastic. Welcome to you too. So I'm going to start off by doing a formal introduction of Bishop Davies. Bishop Davies was born in Cape Town. His father was an Anglican clergyman, and he read history and social anthropology at UCT and theology at Cambridge. He was ordained an Anglican priest in London. For a very long time, Bishop Davies had a concern for the most exploited, and therefore he became an activist in anti-apartheid activities way back when in Cape Town. While in London, he became increasingly aware of the exploitation and the abuse of the natural world and nature. In 1977, he returned to Cape Town to be the rector of the parish of Holy Trinity in Kalk Bay. And there he saw the effects of the demolitions of informal settlements by the then apartheid government. In 1980, he was appointed to the Anglican Church Department of Mission, and that took him to various parts of the world. And for many years, he was very active in environmental justice. And in 1995, he proposed a major synod resolution for the Anglican Church of Southern Africa entitled Save Our Future. When he retired from his diocese in 2005, the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute was formed. And this was about enabling people to recognize their God-given environmental responsibility. So Bishop Davies, to start off our conversation, the question we'd like you to speak on for 5 to 7 minutes: suppression is a violent yoke on people, and often to break free, people explode with anger. How have you used non-violent principles to help people heal from a suppressed mindset? So over to you, Bishop. I'm going to ring my merry bell about 7 minutes, signaling the end of the session. So over to you, Bishop.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this challenge of starting it off. And it really is a privilege, but thank you. And it was a challenge too to say, how have I used the nonviolent principles? And I'm going to ask us that maybe we say, how do we use nonviolent principles as this affects us all? And I think that we must recognize the need at the start to develop a spirituality and an understanding of God and what God wants of us and for us. So we need to spend time in prayer and in meditation so that you strengthen your own inner convictions of God's healing. And I might mention in that wonderful book by Archbishop Desmond and the Dalai Lama called Joy, they both talk about how much time they spend in meditation. And when we do this, we will discover that we have been told how to behave. We've been given guidelines. All faiths have this in common. Are we not all called to seek just equity and to be loving and compassionate? That comes from all our faiths. And I believe this loving compassion must start with the family, where love and compassion and non-violence must be foundational. And I think in South Africa, we need to recognize the challenge to overcome the legacy of apartheid and the migratory labor system. And we need to reestablish the joy and value of family life and discover that we ourselves must be peaceful and non-violent. And and this is so important because by nature, we humans can be aggressive and violent, but we can also be loving and gentle. But by nature, can be self-centered and fight for our survival, but also care for and protect others. Think of a mother and a father who protect and risk their lives for their children. And this happens among humans. It also happens among animals and birds. We had a wonderful experience many years ago when we were in Zimbabwe, near the falls, and everybody had gone out of the camp, and a troop of baboons came in and started going around the camp. And one baby baboon picked up a plastic bag. And I went towards that baby baboon to say, look, you mustn't eat that plastic. And the father baboon saw me, and he came charging towards me. And I retreated then, of course. And now we've got can you hear the video going on now?
We can hear you.
No, I'm just suddenly, I've got something, hang on, I'll try and stop that. I must now get back to where I was. I'm going to ask Kate. Sorry, this is taking up. There we are. We suddenly got a recording of what went on first. So this daddy baboon sat this little baboon on his knee and stroked him and said, there, you know, I've protected you. So I think it's an instinct among us all. But non-violence depends on our social conditioning, I believe. We are, I believe, the only creatures that use corporal punishment. And I think the government's prohibition on corporal punishment is excellent, and it stands against capital punishment. And at school, when I was a boy, we had corporal punishment. It was a nightmare. Prefects could beat the juniors. If I've got time, I'm going to tell you a personal story. I don't usually talk about my family, but when our young daughter was only about 2, I'd been away on a trip. It was, I think, a Saturday afternoon. I just got back. I was exhausted. We were trying to have an afternoon nap, and she was so excited. She wouldn't go and lie down and go to sleep. And eventually she came through just as we were going to sleep. And I was so tired, I got up and I thwacked her bottom. And she started yelling. And I put her in her bed and I said, now go to sleep. She screamed for 15 minutes. And then eventually she stopped. We thought, gosh, now we finally won. We finally stopped her. And then this patter of little feet came around the door. And this tear-streaked face came around the door and said, Daddy, you must say sorry for hitting me. And she was offended that her father had done that. And I really think that's really commendable, that we don't need to have that kind of behavior. So on a family level, we must practice nonviolence. And don't we need that in our country today? But look at this socially. We know the horror stories of America and American guns and the liberal use of guns by the US police. I've got another personal story on the social level. You know that police in England are not armed. They walk around on their beat with truncheons. In 1968, students across the world came out against military and the military and bureaucracy. There was an anti-nuclear movement, environmental movement, hippie movement, anti-Vietnam War movement, women's liberation movement. And I was a young priest in London, and I took part in a huge demonstration outside the Daily Mirror building. And as thousands of demonstrators are pushing up against the Daily Mirror building and its glass-fronted thing, all the police were forming a barricade with their arms linked, and they began to lose hold of each other, and their links were breaking down. So the police officer held up his hand, and he said, hold on, everybody. And everybody stopped pushing. The police re-linked their arms. He then said, carry on pushing. There was no violence, no injuries. The demonstrators made their point, and the police prevented damage to the building. So we can control behavior without violence. And I think we must all faiths must come out against violence and guns. And talking about violence and guns, we then go on to an international level. And I think we've got to come out much more strongly against weapons of mass destruction. You know, the USA, Trump is wanting a defense budget of $750 billion US. And you can just think of what that money could do if it was turned to caring for violence, for the environment, and overcoming poverty. So how do we free people from anger when they are suppressed? I think first they must be heard, and we can play a role in listening and then speaking out on their behalf. How many service delivery protests have we had over the past few years? Protests because people see and experience the injustices and inequalities prevailing in our country. Where these protests have been wrong is when they turn violent and destroy property, frequently community property. There's an alarming level of violence and destruction in our country. Let people express their hurts and frustrations. Speak out for them, but let us not be destructive and violent. I love the quotes we had at the start with Mahatma Gandhi. And then we can articulate for the inarticulate. And I used to say that nature was the most inarticulate, but now nature is exploding in suppressed anger with droughts and floods and cyclones and wildfires. And then faith communities must speak out, verbalize for impoverished communities, organize as many communities as we've seen that many communities have organized over COVID-19, express ourselves and demonstrate to do it non-violently, speaking out for all life. The life of every creature, every plant is important. I like to say that the greatest iniquity, can I say the greatest sin, is to cause a species to become extinct. So we have taken part, our members of the faith communities here in Cape Town, in quite a number of demonstrations, marching to Parliament in the company of black, white, children and aged. They have been great fun. And we hold vigils and prayer services to seek justice and to overcome the frustrations. My wife, Kate, as you may know, held a vigil every morning, every Wednesday morning from 7 a.m. for 4 years against the proposed nuclear deal. But how are we then motivated for this? This is coming to the end. I think it is following the teaching of all faith leaders, this extraordinary command to love your enemy. Look at the lives of Archbishop Desmond and Dalai Lama. Both could be filled with bitterness, but they're filled with the most extraordinary love and joy. Finally, and most important, overcome the horrendous lust for control and power we see in the world today, exemplified among world leaders, world political leaders. And we must recognize, please, that we are part of the web of life, seeking to live in harmony with all life, not to be the dominator of all life. Thomas Berry, who is this wonderful theologian in the United States, wrote that we must treat all life with respect. Live as a communion of subjects, not as a collection of objects. I'm just going to end by showing you this illustration. You'll see here a triangle and a circle of life. in the triangle, you'll see man at the top. And this is how we like to operate in the past, man as dominating the rest of life on this planet, and I'm afraid to say exploiting it. How we should see it is the circle of life. We, humans, are part of the web of life, and we must live in harmony, non-violently, with all of life. So let us live in peace and harmony with one another, all life, with love and compassion built on the foundation of justice and equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Davies. I'm not going to summarize. I just want to highlight the importance of spirituality in how we cultivate and implement non-violent principles. So thank you for that. I'm going to go straight over to our second esteemed guest, Ela Gandhi. Ela Gandhi is the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, and she has been for a very long time a South African peace activist. She was a member of Parliament in South Africa from 1994 to 2004, where she aligned with the African National Congress Party, representing the Phoenix area of Inanda in the KwaZulu-Natal province. Her parliamentary committee assignments included the welfare, the public enterprises committees, as well as the ad hoc committee on surrogate motherhood. She was an alternate member of the Justice Committee and served on Theme Committee 5 on Judiciary and Legal Systems. She's currently the founding director of the Gandhi Development Trust. We are so privileged to have you. And the question, Mrs. Gandhi, we would like to pose to you, and I'd like to start off with a quote from the American historian and author who says, "It can be very difficult to speak truth to power." This is Abajani. He says, "Circumstances, however, have made doing so increasingly necessary." So the question to you is, in your work of consistently advocating for peace, equality, and justice, how did the cultivation of nonviolence principles empower you? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Firstly, I would prefer to talk about, the entire movement rather than myself, because all the work that was done, like Father Davies spoke, earlier, it's by people coming together. So the work that we did was us coming together. That's the first point. The second point is, how do we speak truth to power? Now, there are lots of challenges that we face even today. When we look around us, the corruption, the challenges of things like, the nuclear energy that people were talking about in South Africa. And how does one then confront this? And I have looked at 3 points in talking, truth to power. The first point is that we have to gather information. We have to know what is it that we are saying and why we are saying it. Because otherwise it becomes like, you are challenging somebody but without information. So that is very, very important, to gather information and knowledge as much as we can before we start condemning anything or saying anything. And it's not difficult. It doesn't take years to gather knowledge. You can gather it within hours today. But we have to be careful of looking at knowledge, authentic knowledge, because at the moment you have a lot of fake news as well and fake information that is around. So one needs to be careful about how you gather that knowledge. So that's the first point, that you have to gather knowledge. The second point is, once you have educated, with that knowledge, educated yourself or a group of people, the second point is to educate the community. Because often when you have just one voice, people tend to ignore it. But when you have a whole lot of people behind you, then people stand up and take cognizance. So if you look at people like Martin Luther King, Mandela, Gandhi, and all these leaders of struggles, you find that their strength is derived from the people, from the followers, from the people who are standing with them. If they were alone, they might not have been able to achieve what they achieved. So it's very important to have the community with you. The community is the most important sector that you have to mobilize. So that's the second point, that when you have information, you start educating the community about it and gather their buy-in or their support for whatever it is that you want to do. So that's the second point. Then the third point is that we have to train people. Now, if you look at Gandhiji's history, there were times, there was a time when he called for nationwide stay away, nationwide strike. And it was absolutely beautiful, where every person all around India decided to just stayed away from work, refused to deliver. Even the little hawkers and people who sold milk on the street and so on decided to stay away. So it was a very, very well supported strike. But what happened is, because he hadn't trained people before calling for the strike, it turned out that it became violent. And when it became violent, he apologized and he called off the strike. Now, those were two very, very difficult decisions to take. When people were already incited and wanted to do things, he had to take this decision and say, look, I'm sorry that this has happened. People, we shouldn't burn down things. We shouldn't be killing people. We must stop and we must repent for what we did. He called for a fast. He called everyone to go at least on a 24-hour fast. And he himself went on a 72-hour fast. So he repented, he called off the strike, and he, apologized for whatever had happened. And that was a huge step. It was also not a popular step, because many people felt that this wasn't the right thing to do. But he was, for him, the principle was very important, the principle of nonviolence, that you don't destroy property, you don't destroy people, you don't kill people. And so he took that decision, and then after that, he ensured that before he embarked on any mass movement, that he had fully trained people. So when he embarked on the Salt March in 1930, He trained 75 people. 75 people were properly trained before they embarked, and the 75 people and himself started the Salt March. They walked from village to village, and every person became an educator. They educated the community as they walked. And then when the community was educated, they arrived after many days at the shore of the ocean, and where they made salt and defied the salt law. So it was the 75 trained people that carried out this operation, and then millions of people came, supported this, and everything was on a non-violent basis because people were trained. People pledged non-violence when they went into this movement. So the three things, again, I want to emphasize. Number one is you have to arm yourself with knowledge. Number two is you have to train people. Number three is you have to mobilize the community. You can't do it alone. And then you challenge the powers that be. So I think I'll stop there. Those are the three main issues.
So thank you very much for illustrating also the practical approach that Mahatma Gandhi used to mobilize people and to educate people. I think both you and Bishop Davies have emphasized the importance of voice and the voice of people, bringing that to the fore, and that leadership does not take place in a vacuum, but in the context of people. So thank you very much. We look forward to engaging further. So our next speaker I'm going to introduce is Associate Pastor Kennedy Wandawanda. He is from the Church of Central Africa Presbyterian in Malawi. He was originally raised in the Church of Central Africa Presbyterian, where he volunteered from a very young age. He then studied theology through the church's pastor's training and went on to pursue further studies in economics and accounting. He currently serves as a youth pastor, and his main focus is to help mentor the youth and young adults in their self-development, as well as their journey to deepen their faith and love in God. He sees the importance of using the Word of God as a guide in one's life. So again, welcome. The question, Pastor, to you, of course, is about young people, which interests me greatly. So the perspective we would like to begin with regarding your input is how you have used non-violent principles to help other young people stay motivated for change and transformation without resorting to anger. Specifically, as many young people say, change is not coming soon enough. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lucille. I feel very privileged to be in such esteemed company today. I feel very honored to be able to speak in this format. So I don't think I have quite a lot to say, but something very brief and something that I often speak to a lot of the youth that I do work with. And the question that was posed is really interesting, but I thought I would maybe sort of break it up into two parts. And first of all, explaining about, in a way, the change and the transformation that one needs to make. And also, secondly, then looking at how one can then avoid resorting to anger or other forms of violence when they don't see the change coming about. And I think, as Lucille has gracefully introduced, I personally prefer using the Bible as, in a way, as an educative tool to really be able to help guide young people. So I'll be speaking from that perspective today. So I'm not going to preach for us today. You don't have to worry about that. But first of all, I wanted to first of all speak about the change. What is the change or the transformation that one needs to undergo? If we think about changing or transforming, it means from going from one state to another. Then where are we now and where do we need to be? And also, why is this change so important? Now, Paul, he shared something that was quite profound, as he said that if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. And reading out these verses, it sounds really amazing. And you think to yourself, am I going to get a new makeover? Maybe some of us, as summer's coming up, we're maybe looking to get into a much, I think people call it today a summer body or something like that. Now, is the transformation that we're going to undergo something physical? But it's not a physical transformation that Paul was speaking about. He was saying that if one comes into Christ, something does change. Now, what is it that goes to change through meeting Christ? He mentioned what Paul was alluding to was that the mind, heart, as well as the spirit within a person is what actually changes. So it's not something physical, but it's actually something that is quite intangible, something that we can't actually be able to touch physically. And it's something within us. Now, when we then undergo this change, what are the qualities that one will then be able to possess? And there's something else later on that Peter wrote about. And he said that if one is able to go through this change and transformation, he mentioned 8 qualities that one would be able to possess. First of all, beginning with faith, then goodness, knowledge, self-control, perseverance, godliness, mutual affection, and lastly, love. Now, when these things were being written about, he was explaining that ultimately the end objective is to be able to attain love. Then we need to understand that the change that I need to go through, it is first of all to be able to attain each and every single one of these qualities, but also to be able to attain love. But what kind of love do I need to show? And it's, for one, maybe we might think of love as maybe buying a gift for someone that we care about, or spending time with someone that we love dearly, or maybe even volunteering our services to someone that we see as in need. All of these things are forms of love as well. But I wanted us to, since today we're speaking about trying to avoid nonviolence, about a different kind of a form of love that we actually need to make sure that we possess. And I think about the story that I wanted to share with us. I'm sure most of us are quite familiar, but it was on the night that Jesus was about to be taken to the cross, and he was about to be arrested. Now, a group of guards came to arrest Jesus at that time. Now, Peter, wanting to protect Jesus, he withdrew his sword, and then he cut off one of the guards' ear. Now, at that very moment in time, Jesus was extremely angry with what Peter had done. And he then rebuked Peter, warning him that if anyone lives by the sword, he will die by the sword. And then he went on to go to this guard and picked up the ear of this guard and healed him. Then what was it that Jesus possessed that Peter did not possess? And what Jesus possessed and what Peter did not possess was love. Not to say that Peter never loved anyone, but in that moment in time, instead of actually responding in violence, he should have actually tried to, in a way, display the same love that Jesus did. Now, Jesus knew that if he was to be handed over to these guards, he was going to face a great deal of pain and suffering at their hands. But instead of responding in turn, what he rather chose to show even that guard at that very moment in time was love. Then those of us who are also, in a way, those of us who are also living in the world today, how can we be able to learn from this example? In reality, it's very easy to be able to show love to people who love us the same. When we go through our day-to-day basis, when people are kind to us, they spend time with us, or they even take interest in us. it is very easy to be able to show that person love. But on the other hand, when someone treats us poorly, when we are facing, when we face rejection, when we even face discrimination, when we face hate, or even when we face physical violence, at that moment in time, our first response is not to show that person love. Our first response is even sometimes to even respond in kind. Then how can we make sure that we don't respond respond to things like anger and violence in these situations? Then we need to try to practice love, not in times where it is easy or convenient, but to practice love when it is even actually the most difficult, when chances are the other person will not be able to love us back. And something else that I wanted to add on, there's also a verse that is very dear to my heart, and it speaks about that God, he is not impatient, and he waits patiently for all of us to be able to come to repentance so that we can be able to receive salvation. Then God, who is in heaven, he watches our inner way, our characters and actions that sometimes are not always in line with what he desires. But at that moment in time, God practices patience with us, waiting for the time that we're able to grow and to mature, so that ultimately we can also be able to be saved as well. Then in the world that we are living in at this moment in time, how can we make sure that we don't respond in anger or even violently? Then I'd say it is two things. First of all, it is to practice patience with one another. And secondly, it is also to be able to practice love. So that is all from my side. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Pastor. The three things I'm taking from what you're saying is that love and patience and faith are antidotes to anger and violence. So thank you for that. And you've also highlighted how change, we often can't describe it. It's often intangible, yet it's there, yet we see the change. And I think that leads us, Pastor Wandawanda, straight into our last esteemed guest. And I'd like to introduce her, Sister Veronica McHugh. She was born and educated in Ireland. She developed a love of travel while working for the Irish Civil Service, which took her all over the world. And I love this part, that after all this travels, she developed an interest in inner travel, which led her to the Brahma Kumaris in London in 1976. Here she became one of the first Western students at the organization's World Spiritual University. After spending 6 years at the Brahma Kumaris European headquarters, she went to the United States to establish teaching centers in Tampa and Miami in Florida. And she continues to coordinate the Brahma Kumaris work throughout the state of Florida and frequently travels the world to teach. Her teachings offer spiritual principles to guide people to heightened awareness, as well as practical methods to help us access our inner power, to build resilience and stability, and increase our capacities for clarity, courage, and compassion. So welcome again, sister. And I'm not going to read the whole question. I'm going to go straight in. This approach about inner change is quite critical. To engage in the inner work with kindness, gentleness, and understanding is key to inner transformation. Please share with us how you approach this notion of inner work. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucille, and to my two brothers and my sister for their wonderful sharing. and the feeling that you wanted to engage with each one as to what they were saying, and whether it was with the bishop, because there was also marches happening in Northern Ireland in 1968, but unfortunately the police were brutal when it came to the marchers, and things have now changed considerably since then. And I very much agree with what my sister Ela says, that these great leaders, they were like the figureheads, but they couldn't have done what they did without the tacit agreement of the human race, if you like, who knew what justice meant, who knew what equality meant. And it was almost like as if they powered them. And my lovely brother Kennedy, and those magnificent stories that he told. And again, this quality I think that he speaks about in terms of Jesus, love, yes, but the manifestation of it was compassion. And yet he didn't set himself up by saying that he would forgive them, but he said, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. So the role of forgiveness, if you like, goes to a higher source. Thank you. You're allowing this, my sharing, to be very subjective in a sense. So I'm going to go back to when I first encountered the Brahma Kumaris in London in 1976. And in fact, I still have the form that I filled in on my arrival there. And one of the questions was, why do you want to meditate? And the answer was very succinct: self-realization. And would you believe that within 4 months, I had that experience, but rather than it being the end of the journey, rather than it being the destination, it was really the beginning of the journey, and continues to be part of the journey. This understanding your own self in terms of all of your complexity, the fact that you're an eternal being, and from my perspective, that there have been many lifetimes. And along with that, side by side, and also powered by the idea of knowing God as he is, how he is. And so the two things hand in hand, knowing God, knowing myself. There's a famous American author, James Baldwin, who said that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And this was one of the things that I have been learning over all these years, the many disguises that we have taken on or put on, either to protect ourselves or for some other reason. And again, referencing a poet who said something like that the thoughts of men, that we hide them, that we conceal them for fear that with blame will be reproved. So we all move tricked in disguises, alien to the rest of men and alien to ourselves. And so it was one of the things that I discovered, what I would often present as my quality or a good thing. Later on, I would discover that it was hiding something less than holy, if you like. Now, again, when my understanding, and I go to the Judaic Christian holy book, the Bible, and as you can see, the end and the beginning are the same. And so referencing the bishop's circle or cycle, And so this idea, which is very empowering at one level, that I originally was in the likeness of God, that there was a divinity, but that throughout the process of life, of being connected with matter, that things changed, that pure energy decreased, if you like. And so part of the work now is to reconnect with my divinity and to re-emerge it, if you like. I sometimes think that the soul, it's almost like as if it has these tubes coming out of it, and the tubes, one through which love flows, one through which peace flows, one through which happiness or joy flows, one for innocence, and one for wisdom. But it's almost like they've become caked, they've become, you know, where they have, it's almost like there's a stenosis in each one of those valves. And so that energy is not able to flow like how it should. And so then the need for cleaning that, in a sense, but it's not as difficult as it sounds. The main thing is to remind the self of my likeness to my Father, to God, and to draw that energy into myself, which will begin that cleansing process. And so, yes, I absolutely subscribe to the idea of the journey needing kindness. Some of the things for me that have worked that make things easier is acceptance. First, an awareness, an appreciation, the appreciation might come later, but the acceptance of whatever it is that's going on at the moment. And ultimately, because without the acceptance of where we're at and what's going on for me, then I don't think movement, I don't think change is possible. And going back to that thing of where I mentioned that I would, what would be revealed to me in my meditations is that I had been hiding some defect in the guise of something holy. And so a sense of humor, that even whilst I'm dealing with eternity and whatever else, but that you don't take yourself too seriously. I think a spiritual atmosphere. Another thing that's very important for me is the company that I surround myself with. And I'm not saying that you only remain in the company of people who are absolutely like yourself. That would be a futile exercise. But at least to begin with, to be around people that are manifesting what your ideal for yourself is, that they are showing it in their lives, they're reflecting back to you, and also that you're also able to see your own flaws and what needs adjustment or correction. And in that way, you're gathering strength, which will then enable you to be in any company, and then rather than you being contaminated by something not so holy, that rather you can contribute something just simply by being yourself. And there's also this trust in timing. Are we okay? There's a trust in timing. But I'm going to go back to what has been mentioned throughout, and it was a recent experience. And that is the experience of love. And so not in a remote or an idealistic way, but in meditation. That for me is what endeared me to this life. But the experience of divine love, because in that experience, then nothing else exists. and you're able to hold everyone and everything, you both absorb and you absolve everyone as well from what you might have considered were past hurts or transgression, including your own self. And so I do believe that each one in their uniqueness has their own approach as to how they will deal with their transgressions. And so you can do it the hard way, or you can do it the soft way. And I think the soft way is through yoga, is through meditation. So not only do we carry out whatever the act is, but there's a subtle mechanism within each soul, a subtle wisdom. And for a while, you're in tacit agreement with it, that this is what you deserve, or this is all you deserve. And you could be selling yourself short, or that even you deserve some kind of punishment. Punishment is never going to be effective. It's never going to get you to where you want to be. And so that at the moment, it's like as if, the universe is waiting to complete itself, and it needs me to be on board. Another thing is simply timing. And it's like one of our, Daddy Janki, who was the head of our organization until she passed away a few months ago. And one of the things she said is that all future possibilities are in the seed of the present moment, and that the hope of the world lies in each one of you. And so it's humbling in a sense. And so these would just be some of the things. And I focus very, very much recently on the world that I see in the future. And so there's been these exquisite, if you like, expressions of divinity experienced. And yet I know that there continues to be excavation necessary, just like releasing, the diamond from the earth, or David from that piece of marble. And so that there's hope, there's great hope in and faith that we will get there together. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. I think I was so reluctant to ring the bell, both for you and Bishop Davies, but I'm trying to be a good moderator time. So I just want to highlight one or two things without summarizing the whole. I think the importance of understanding the self as an internal being is a very important point. And knowing God is also knowing myself, are two key things. I also love how you've highlighted how we can cultivate almost a peace approach or a non-violent approach by keeping in good company, always being in the context of a spiritual atmosphere. And then I think you highlighted the importance of how dealing with transgressions is never effectively dealt with a violent approach, but that a softer approach of deep love is useful. So thank you very much, Sister McHugh. Now, to all our participants, I have not seen any questions. So I'm hoping that if you have questions, you would put it in the chat. And I'm hoping Sister Pratibha will help me if she sees any questions in the chat. So I'm just going to give it a moment or so to see if any questions appear. Otherwise, I'm going to ask each of our speakers in the time that we have left and all of you have alluded to this. How can we begin to cultivate a culture of compassion towards ourselves and to others in this context of violence? So let me frame that again. How can we begin to cultivate a culture of compassion towards ourselves and to others in this context of violence? So I'm going to ask Bishop Davies if he would like to share just very briefly some thoughts about how can we cultivate this culture of compassion. Bishop Davies, are you able to hear me?
I'm able to hear you, thank you. And I've got the screen there, and it really needs good thought, your question, but I think that we are increasingly becoming conscious of the need to make compassion central in our lives and in our society, with the Charter of Compassion, which offers guidelines, and that compassion should be, integral to our behavior with one another and with God's creation and world. And I think I'm right in saying that Archbishop Desmond and the Dalai Lama, in talking about compassion, they also talked about empathy, and that is more than just compassion. When you see somebody suffering, you really try to understand, to empathize with the pain they're going through, and then that really highlights this compassion you would feel for a person who is in pain or in suffering, or for a compassion, empathy for animals and that are being threatened or becoming extinct. So it's a real sense of feeling.
Thank you, Bishop Davies. Can I go over to Sister Ela Gandhi for her thoughts, please?
Thank you, Sister Lucille. I think, compassion is something that grows from childhood. Early childhood, people begin to experience it. And usually, if you experience it from your parents, and then you can also become compassionate. But having said that, we know that we live in a society which is highly violent, where compassion is secondary. There are other things that we see around us. We see bullying, we see, violent propaganda, if you can say, or just something that is in the community. So growing up in that kind of situation, how do we change? How do we bring about a different sort of person, a different understanding of the world around us? And I'll quote one of the things that Gandhiji said. He said that, and I quote him, "Silence is a great help to a seeker after truth. Silence is a great help to a seeker after truth. In the attitude of silence, the soul finds the path in a clearer light, and what is elusive and deceptive resolves itself into crystal clearness. Our life is a long and arduous quest after truth, and the soul requires inward restfulness to attain its full height. So it's about silence, about going within yourself and beginning to realize the truth within yourself. Once you've realized that, then you can bring out compassion. So, in situations of violence, how do we bring compassion? And what I heard from His Holiness the Dalai Lama is don't act, don't react immediately. Take a moment, think about what has happened. And in that moment, you begin to realize yourself, inside yourself, and you bring out the compassion. Because anger blinds you. Somebody talked about alcohol and, in the chat. But anger is similar to alcohol because it blinds you. All the feelings, all the things that you've learned about compassion, about not hitting out, about being nonviolent, is completely overshadowed by anger. And if you give in to anger and act impulsively, then you act and afterwards you regret it. And this is what happens with a lot of people. A lot of those who have changed, and there are people who have changed from being violent, from being abusers, have come back and have realized that this is not the right thing to do. And one of the ways that they are able to change is through going inwards and having that moment of silence and beginning to realize that there is something good, something that's inside you that is good, and let's bring out that good in yourself rather than that evil that is also lurking inside. So yeah, that's how I see it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Gandhi. I'm going to go to Pastor Wandawanda, and I would like him to also, if he doesn't mind, address the question from Sherry V, who says, how do you tell families that have no food, no money, just hunger? How do you teach them spirituality? So please share some thoughts around cultivating compassion for self and others, but also how do you teach people spirituality who are hungry and destitute? Thank you, Pastor Wandawanda.
Thank you very much. I think with regards in terms of how to develop compassion, I would lean with what Ela Gandhi was saying, in the sense that it starts with, first of all, being taught compassion. I think, but for most people today, they've never experienced compassion. If we think about the way that the world is now today, it is very cold and dispassionate. And many people have never actually ever experienced someone who cares for them deeply. Then we then need to become those people who can show other people compassion. I know it might sound maybe very far-fetched from what I'm saying, but there was a time I was just walking, I was in the mall, and there was a lady there who, she was seeming very, very down. She seemed a little bit out of sorts. So I stopped for a moment and I asked her, are you okay? Then she said, I'm fine. Then I said, I can tell that you're not really okay. And then at that moment in time, she just started crying. But it's because no one had actually taken the time to sort of do something to her. In the same way, I think a lot of people, they're going through life in this way where nobody has actually taken the time to take care of them or to spend some time to even to hear what they have to say. So in this sense, I think to create compassion within the world, we have to show compassion to others, and not just to the people that are directly within our circle or within our immediate friends or community, but for people who are even outside it. And to answer the question regarding how do we teach people who have nothing spirituality, I think in a way their situation I know as difficult as it is, it helps them to understand some very, very key things spiritually. If we think about that they're not able to have a lot of things physically, then from already they can already be able to understand that there's nothing that the world can be able to give them. Then where can our help come from? In a way, if they're in this situation, it means friends, family, or even the government has in a way forgotten about them and then put them to one side. But in that situation, then who can we then be able to turn to in that situation? The only person who can we can be able to turn to in that situation, it is to God. Then I feel the physical situation that they do find themselves in can help them to understand a lot of important things spiritually as well. In a way, man will at some point in time will disappoint us. However, through God, then God will not fail to be able to meet us where our need is the greatest. So I think the fact that they're maybe even in this situation can be of benefit for them, because sometimes having a lot of material things also has a way of pulling one away from seeking spiritual growth and also development as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Wandawanda. Before I go to our next speaker, I just want to acknowledge Anne Hoffman's comment. Sister Gandhi did allude to that, but she says, of course, there are lots of people in South Africa who've not been educated, and an escape for people, particularly men, is alcohol. And of course, when they consume alcohol, they become very violent, and it's women who often suffer at the hands of that abuse. There's also a question, and hopefully we'll have some time to answer that, from Mariam Kasimji, who says that protecting and teaching young minds to be non-violent is nullified by these electronic games with hardcore violence and immorality. And she says what would be helpful if such games are not allowed in South Africa. And she's asking the question, what can we do to disallow the sale of some material? So perhaps our speakers may want to think about that question while I go over to Sister McHugh about just some thoughts about how we can cultivate self-compassion and compassion for others. Thank you, Sister.
Thank you. Compassion is, I would say, an attribute of the original nature of the soul, and probably resides in the domain of love. And a little bit different, I think, from empathy, because sometimes empathy involves my own emotions, or it will want to see, if I'm seeing you as a victim, then I'm also looking for a villain, perhaps. Whereas compassion, I think, is an empowering thing. And the first thing that compassion does is really sees the person. Two things. One, when I was in South Africa 2 years ago, and we were having a similar dialogue, and there was a young Buddhist, I don't remember if he was a monk or not, but one of the things that he was trying to do, and I agreed with it so very much, and that was to get into the schools, especially in the primary stages, a way of teaching compassion. And I felt that more than even say peace, that it's a very demonstrable thing, compassion. And also thinking once of a child who demonstrated great compassion, a 4-year-old child in front of another. And my question then, is compassion innate or can it be cultivated? And I think both things are there. And one other thing was, and this I saw on Oprah Winfrey. She was doing a news show here in the States. It's very popular on a Sunday evening. And she was telling a story, the gist of which, and it had been a realization for her too. And it was this place in the Northwest where it was like a school or facility that was for people who had undergone trauma, whether of physical or sexual abuse or whatever else. And for her, in relation to other people, the question was changed. And so rather than saying, as we so often do when people are misbehaving or they're just not logical in their manifestation, and you are inclined to say, what's wrong with you? And instead, the question that needed to be asked was, what happened to you? What happened to you? And so then both that empathy, because there is part of you that knows there, but for the grace of God, go I. And that that you can learn even as you're hopefully providing something as well. So the two things then, it is both innate and it can be cultivated.
Thank you, Sister McHugh. I am now going to be very directive. There was the question about the games that are violent in nature. And I'm going to pounce on Sister Gandhi as a former lawmaker, whether she perhaps has any comments about what we can do to disallow the sale of such material. Sister, do you have some thoughts on that question?
Thank you for that question. I think, from my experience in Parliament, we often have a lot of things that we want to legislate on, but we have to also look at public opinion. Now, there might be some people who would object to these games, but when you start looking at the general public, are the general public, is it going to support this kind of a law? So then one thing is that there has to be public opinion for it. We have to begin to look at whether we can get that public support. The second thing is that, there is this balance between right to information. And these games are part of that information and, access to information and that sort of thing. And the, question of morality, ethics, and those kinds of issues. So when you bring a balance between the two, you see that there are a lot of laws that we wouldn't like. We would want to change those laws. But because of that balance that has to be maintained, it's difficult for lawmakers to make the law. But it's not difficult for parents to control. And this is where I think our emphasis should be. That we need to begin to understand that these games are bad for our children and not buy them. There was a time when we used to say, don't buy guns, don't have guns for sale, and we shouldn't give children toy guns. I'm talking about toy guns. And we used to picket shops, and and sometimes we got success and sometimes we didn't. Some shops stopped putting guns in their windows. They would sell them, but they wouldn't advertise them, which was a small step, in the right direction. But it was people picketing and people asking for those things, lobbying. So I think that a lot depends on that. I don't know if I should take this time for answering the question about alcohol.
Please do, ma'am.
Yeah, I do realize that, alcohol, drugs, it has an effect on the mind. And you find that often when people are drunk or under the influence of drugs, they do commit a lot of violence. And the first person to experience that is the partner in the home. So yes, those are problems. But again, they are social problems. And the first thing is that the person has to realize that, he becomes a monster when he's under the influence of alcohol, and he needs to change. And if he begins to realize that there are lots of people who are going to, like AA, getting help from other organizations and so on, and changing their behavior. So change is possible, but there has to be a motivation. And that motivation is more difficult than actually, because you've won half the battle once the person is motivated to accept that I'm going to go for help. That motivation to go for help is more difficult than actually going for help and changing. So, that motivation comes from within the family, within the home, where people need to keep, slowly motivate this person to give up this and go for help in order to give it up. But I accept that under alcohol, you do get angry, and that's yeah.
So thank you, Sister Gandhi, and thank you for the questions that have been posed. We appreciate it. So we've got our last 15 minutes maximum left before we go into a meditation. So I would like to hear from all the panelists in a minute or 2 minutes. What is your final comment on the importance of non-violence as a strategy to change society? And I'm saying that in the context of such deep violence, even by the state in South Africa, where people have been killed by law enforcement officers. You know, people's homes have been demolished by the state. So I'd like to hear from each speaker, what is your last comment, in a sense, on why non-violence is the way to go as a strategy to change society. So I'd like to start off this time with the Pastor Wandawanda. Just a minute or two, your last comments. I'm not sure if Pastor Kennedy can hear me.
Maybe he's dropped off, so maybe continue with the next speaker.
He may have dropped off. So thank you for that, Sister Pratibha. So I'm going to go over to Bishop Davies. Bishop Davies, I hope you got the question. Your last comments on the importance of non-violent strategies as a way to effect change. Over to you, Bishop.
Thank you very much. And I think it is important. And you know, politicians often react to pressures, and so this could well be where the faith communities need to really try to become much more articulate about pressurizing the government. We know that the government has got there's this gun-free South Africa campaign. and the police that said they want people to hand in unlicensed guns, and they won't be prosecuted if they hand them in. And I've heard some comments saying this is frankly not working. When you look at the whole drug competitions and the gangs, but I think that somehow we have to pressurize the government to say we do want a gun-free South Africa. And I think many of us have said that New Zealand is providing a wonderful example of having a minimum of guns and really a non-violent society. And I think South Africans would welcome it. I mean, the killings of children in these townships is horrendous. So let's say it's got to be both. It's got to be ourselves saying we don't want so much violence, but it's also got to be pressurizing the governments that they can introduce legislation. And let's face it, let's have far greater discipline among the police. You know, the fact that a man was dragged out at the start of the lockdown because he was drinking a beer and he died for it. You know, that kind of behavior is really unacceptable. And we know how horrendous this violent behavior is in the States. So it's the pressure coming to be nonviolent, but also to disarm ourselves. And I think part of that might be responding to that earlier question about the violent videos and games. And I've always hated them. I don't like watching violence on a cinema screen. But so I think that we need to try to introduce stricter laws about that, so that these violent shows are not, and to face the fact that they are allowed because some people like them, they can make money out of them. And we've got to stop letting, just because people can make money out of something, that they're allowed to do it. We have to say this is not good for the social well-being, and to encourage the fact that it's much better. You know, I think in earlier years, men were expected to be macho, strong chaps, and we're learning much more the need to be compassionate, caring people. But it does take, since you asked me, I was a bit horrified when, I think it was a year or so ago, the Navy and the Army had exercises down at Muizenberg, Sunrise Beach, showing off our tanks and our guns. And apparently people flocked down to see them. And you know, I think we've got to move away from all of this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. I'm going to ask for Sister Gandhi, her last comment, please.
I think, you know, I mustn't be misunderstood. I'm not saying that it's impossible to do anything. Everything is possible. That's what I believe in. I'm a very optimistic person. So anything you want to do is possible, but you have to work hard. You have to get that public opinion. And we must remember that when we talk about violent movies, violent games and so on, these are the games that are the most popular. Our children want those games. Our children go out and they want the guns, the toy guns that they see in the windows. So we have to learn to explain to our children that this is not good for you. And once our children stop asking for it and we stop buying them, we don't need laws to enforce that. And I just want to say that, you know, if we look at what happened with alcohol, there's a strong lobby on the other side. And they've got lots of money, more money than we have. And so when that lobby begins to lobby the government for relaxation of laws and things like that, then what voice do we have over there? Unless we build up our strength and say, this is what we want and we are going to get it, then the government is going to be moved to make those laws. So it's not impossible, but it means that we have to strengthen our support base. And until we do that, it is going to be difficult, because they are going to use the whole idea of censorship and all those kinds of human rights and Bill of Rights issues in order to bring about their own, motive or whatever they want. The people who make these violent movies and so on. So yeah, I think that building a culture of non-violence is absolutely crucial. And we should start from the time kids go to nursery school, from the ECD sector, where non-violence needs to be taught, and in the schools as well, and in our homes. So parents need to learn and teach their children as well. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sister Gandhi. Pastor Wandawanda, your last comment on the importance of non-violence.
So I think in terms of my last comment, I would like maybe to share in a way the importance because of the current state of the world. I think I'm personally quite young in a way, but the world that I have come into is a state where there's conflict that is raging all across the world. And each time that you actually turn on your news, there's either a threat of a bigger war that was about to take place. And there's a great deal of fear and anxiety about what could possibly happen in the future. And this is the world that we have all grown up with. But because we see it so often, we've become sort of numb to it. You know that when I'm going to watch the news this evening, that I'm going to see these kinds of things taking place across the world. So people over time have come to be desensitized to the current state that the world is in. But if we were to take a moment, if you can imagine this was the day that you first came to visit the earth, I'm sure you'd be quite shocked to see all the things that are taking place all across the world. And the reason why people have become, in a way, very desensitized to it, I think, just to sort of reiterate what Ela Gandhi was sharing with us, is the importance of peace. That's not something that is actually taught. People don't value or even dream or hope about the world that is free of the current things that me and you are experiencing at this moment in time. No one is speaking about it. No one is actually trying to express the importance of us actually not even fighting, or even trying to share with other people what it could be like to be in a world that is like that. Now, because that's hope is not there in the world, then people are, in a way, are thinking that the form of life that we're living in at this moment in time is the way it's supposed to be. So I think, in a way, as much as there's a lot of negativity that is out there, we then need to also spread a lot of positivity as well. I think that is then our responsibility as well. And in terms of why it's very important is because, in a way, what you take in is what you're also going to give out. Our current state of the way the world is now is not going to, there will not be a dramatic change of events. We're not gonna wake up one day and it will be better all over a sudden. It will continue to get worse unless we try to change the main flow of things. Then we have to then be able to put ourselves and then to really say that I really need to, we all need to start to make a positive change in the world. Otherwise, then the future that we are going to see is, in a way, will be more dire and more difficult than it is at this moment in time. Then I think, like we're expressing, that the importance of educating nonviolence, it's critically important. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Wandawanda. So I'm going to call on Sister McHugh for her last comment on the importance of nonviolence in the context of so much violence, including state violence. Over to you, ma'am.
Again, I am going to come back to all of this on a personal level, and that each one is responsible for their actions, their attitudes, and we're all involved in wanting nonviolence and peace and love of God and all of those things, but each one doing it in their own unique way. And so I do believe that there is also something almost like underground work that's taking place, and it's more to do with intentionality and vibrations. And I do see that there's a connectivity there. I know very clearly that I reached my destination insofar as coming to the Brahma Kumaris through the vibrations generated by someone else whom I didn't even know at that time. And when we speak of violence, usually we're talking about the extreme, but yet what is the violence within me? And so perhaps I'm missing something if I'm still not subscribing, say, to a plant-based diet. Surely there's a violence there. Or maybe there's words that I'm using that are a put down or a criticism, etc. And just seeing this thing of there's been an overabundance of taking, of grabbing, of whether it's from matter, whether it's from nature, whether it's from others, this greed. And so that is a kind of violence as well. And so that each one of those things, I personally am trying to reform, transform within my own self with the focus on, you know, as Gandhi said, be the change you want to see. And I do have faith in that world of nonviolence here on the earth. And so the whole thing of the importance of my thoughts, the whole idea of resonance, where your thoughts and vibrations attract a similar thing into your own life. And so I believe that there's a huge army of humanity that is marching in that direction, not least the young people. They're more clear about it in some ways than we are. And so again, bringing it back to the personal and decreasing whatever is the violence, because now the bar is set very high. It's not about killing or slapping someone, but it's about your own personal life and interactions and relationships.
Thank you, Sister McHugh. So before I hand over to Sister Veronica for her meditation, it's hard to summarize so much richness, but I really want to just summarize by saying, cultivating a culture of non-violence and peace is a protracted journey. We've spoken about the importance of mobilizing and educating communities, organizing the faith communities to take a stand, but we've also spoken about the role of the self, the role of the individual in cultivating non-violence, peace, and compassion. So I want to thank you from my side, and I want to invite now a meditation by Sister Veronica as we come to a closure of this very heartwarming conversation. Sister Pratibha, I know, will thank all the speakers, so I am just handing over the baton as we go into our meditation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucille. With just a conscious breath, I release. I let go. Dropping the name by which I am known, the title that describes what I do in the world. Like taking off an overcoat or hats, which all have expectations from others. I go into my sanctuary. That is already welcoming in its quietness and absence of any other association. And just with the intention of being with myself, unadorned, undecorated, there is light. Gentle and warm. Enfolding me. Almost caressing me. And the lightness that ensues is as if I am no longer limited or confined by the body I call me. And a mixture of thoughts, slow, steady, and feelings. Fill me. I am in the experience watching at the same time. No resistance. And with each thought, it's as if I float higher and easily. No memories, no desires. And as I relax in this state of knowing and accepting, that I am peace. The heart opens to receive. From that purest source of love. As if reminding me thou art that. As the Father is the ocean of love, that is my essence. The only one who can reflect back to me that my original nature is other than physical, is light, is peace, is love. And as his eternal child, innocence, I return to innocence. Om Shanti.
Thank you, Sister Wadi, for that beautiful meditation. I think in some ways it brought us all very beautifully back to the essence of the thread of what was being shared today, that it is really about reconnecting with the heart, reconnecting with the qualities of compassion and love and acceptance, so that whatever we need to do, yes, we have to act, but let that be the foundation from which we act, and connecting to the source so that we can empower that. It's my great pleasure now just to say a big thank you to all of our lovely speakers. I think the gift of the pandemic is that it doesn't matter where we are in the world, but really that we can be together and share this wonderful time together, reflecting on things that matters to our hearts and things that can make a difference. So thank you to Sister Ela, thank you. I know you've had a busy day and busy weekend with the non-violence, International Day of Non-Violence being celebrated, but thank you for making the time to be with us. Bishop Davies, thank you. It's always lovely to see how your work with the environment and your passion for that, how it really comes across very beautifully. So thank you very much. And Pastor Kennedy, again, a young voice is always good to hear, and it's the future. So it was very lovely of you to be with us and share your thoughts and reflections on it. And Sister Wadi, all the way from Miami, we were just looking for an excuse to get you back in SA because we so enjoyed your company and your presence with us, but always so lovingly, gently bringing us back to essence. So thank you very much for that. And Lucille, thank you for navigating this afternoon and saying yes to the request with a big heart, as always. So thank you very much. So thanks, everyone, and stay well, stay healthy, stay safe. Thank you. Shanti.
Thank you, Pratibha. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey, Ross.
Bye.
Thank you very much indeed. Well done. And Lucille, thank you so much for your guidance with it all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's through your wounds that the light gets in. It's in the darkest room that the candle glows. It's at the bottom of the deepest well that the softest earth will break your fall. It's on the mountain that I learned the most. It's when I fell down that I knew my strength. It's not my mistakes till you who I and I will rise like a poor child given a chance, and I will rise like the sun up through the clouds, and I will rise every time that I sing, and when I fall, I'll fall gracefully, 'cause when I fall, I am given wings. Though I am poisoned, though I'm dark and sad, though I am angry at pictures from my past, I am both loving, I am pure and light, I am shadow and mist, both the peace and the fight. It's through your tears that you'll see his face. It's through surrender that you'll ride the wave. And if the walls are built to block your path, just get up and find another way. And I will rise like a poor child given a chance, and I will rise like the sun up through the clouds, and I will rise every time that I sing, and when I fall, I'll fall gracefully, 'cause when I fall, I am given wings. And I will rise like a poor child given a chance, and I will rise like the sun up through the clouds, and I will rise every time that I sing, and when I fall, I'll fall gracefully, 'cause when I fall, I am given wings. When I fall, I'll fall gracefully.